So that's the speaking done. I'm sure there's a lot there to take in. We asked ahead of the webinar that you would submit questions that you have about all of the topics that we've touched on today. So what we were planning to do now is to touch on some of those questions and to give verbal answers now. But as Mary Sheridan also said, we are now on foot of the submissions that we've already received and any that come in, and we would ask you, if you have not already done so, if you have any particular questions, to submit them to us. We will prepare that FAQ and publish it and keep that up to date on an ongoing basis as we develop all the processes and move towards implementation of the IEM and the associated due diligence and learner protection fund requirements. So I have a question here, Mary. It's come from the Dublin College of Advanced Studies. Will there be training for ELE providers and their staff to help meet the requirements of the IEM?
Thanks, Jim. Yes, QQI will provide a series of information sessions for providers which will address all the aspects of the IEM application process. So we'll be sending further details of these information sessions in the coming weeks.
Thanks, Mary. Another one, will providers have a say in the creation of the criteria underpinning and contained in the IEM?
Yes, so we will be consulting with representative stakeholders from the sector regarding the quality assurance and code of practice for ELE. And these meetings will begin in May, and the consultation will be followed by public consultation. So people will be able to give their voice at different stages in whether it's the stakeholder engagement or the public consultation. So all providers will have the opportunity to contribute to the public consultation as well.
Thanks, Mary. Here's one now for Mary Sheridan. It's an expected question. Will the IEM be affordable for smaller providers?
To answer that, the issue of fees hasn't been considered in detail yet, but for the IEM, there are three fees or charges, or three types of fees or charges. There's the initial application fee, which will cover the due diligence, the code of practice, and so on. On an annual basis, there will be an annual charge for the IEM, and on an annual basis, there will be the charge for protection of enrolled learners. The learner protection charge will be determined by the Minister. The fee, the application fee, and the annual charge for the IEM will be determined by QQI, but will need the agreement of the Minister.
Okay, I see some questions coming in there in the chat. Owen Connolly, who said, while I welcome regulation for the delivery of English language and university education, there doesn't seem to be any provision in the IEM for the educational professionals delivering this education. How can we talk about high-level education without addressing teachers' working conditions? Well, the code will cover the areas around employment legislation, so that would be one element in it. The area of actual training of teachers, we're looking at that area, and there may be elements of the code related to that, but it will not address that directly. However, the code is something that can be amended and expanded, or indeed reduced from time to time. So we would see this as the opening of a process, the beginning of a process that in which the ELE sector is coming into a relationship with the education and training system, and that will lead to a dialogue where we will look at all issues in relation to quality as we go forward. I don't know, Mary, whether you wanted to make a comment on that.
Yes, thanks, Jim. We will be looking at teacher qualifications and the possibility of developing. Right now within QQI there is a certificate in TESOL, and we're also looking at the possibility of developing a course to teach young learners and teens following the QA guidelines, which have been developed by QQI. While that's a longer term idea or plan for language centres, we know that there's a lot of need and demand for teachers, particularly for the summer months coming up. And up until now, ASOLs have the ASOLs the prep course for ELT is no longer validated by ASOLs, and it's self-validated. And some providers will be offering that, whether it's face-to-face or online, for the purpose of recruitment of teachers for teens and young learners in the summer.
Thanks, Mary. I see another question from Maeve Egan. Will the IEM provide quality framework for online provision? In short, yes, the code for ELE will cover online provision. We will certainly have a section of the code in that area. Have another question here now, one of the pre-submitted questions. This is from Carlow International English Language School. Will validation be provided for small regional language schools offering short-term 2 to 4 weeks, high-quality specific courses such as English for academic purposes, professional communication to EU residents, as opposed to international students? A certificate of completion petition should be awarded rather than ECTS or similar. Mary, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Thanks, Jim. Yes, the IEM application process is open to everybody, to all ELE providers, including summer centres, and quality assurance will be based on the programmes rather than on final awards or credits.
Thanks, Mary. There's a question about the university ELE provider. Will it need its own IEM or be covered wholly or in part by the institutional one? And that we also had a pre-submitted question on the same topic from NUI Galway English Language Centre. So the quality assurance will apply to all ELE programs, whether they're public or private. But the precise arrangements will depend on the way the academic and corporate governance structure of ELE provision actually sits within an institution. It's that context that will determine whether the provider must apply through the ELE or HE pathways, or indeed both. So that is something we've had engagements with higher education representative bodies on this already, and we are looking at that. But what we have to, I think we will have to look at this on a case-by-case basis to get a full understanding of the academic governance and corporate governance structures that actually operate. And on that basis, we will work that through with individual institutions to determine the best approach.
Jim, can you take a pre-submitted question from Dublin College of Advanced Studies?
Yeah. Do you want to?
So the question is.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, I have that one. Yeah. So Yeah, sorry. Sorry. Yeah. Go ahead, Mary. Sorry, apologies.
So will QQI work in conjunction with the Department of Justice and other government stakeholders to ensure that elements of quality assurance and visa regulations that might be beyond the control of the provider are adhered to? For example, exit exam results are requested at the time of visa renewal currently with the ILEP scheme.
Yeah, we will absolutely be engaging with the Department of Justice, but we will be doing that in conjunction with our parent Department of Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science, and certainly we will raise all the issues as appropriate. But I mean, I must say openly that the operation of the visa system is a matter for the Department of Justice, but we will certainly engage with them in all those matters. I have a question here in the chat. So Thank you for your comprehensive webinar today. However, I am suffering somewhat from a case of a 10-year deja vu. You're not alone. I would ask, what lessons have the QQI learned from their past mistakes to measure providers that this talk of the IEM isn't just another false dawn? Thanks. Well, that's a very interesting question. What I would say there is that a huge amount of the lessons were learned, and I think that has been made manifest in the actual legislative provisions that have been put in place, which are very, very comprehensive and necessarily complicated. Myself and Mary Grennan and Mary Sheridan in particular, in their presentations, we have given you a fairly, I suppose, condensed overview of what's entailed, and as you can see from that, it is quite complex. However, it is necessarily complex, and the reason that is the case, and is necessarily rigorous, is to avoid those false dawns that you mentioned in your chat. I don't know whether Pádraig might want to come in on that one. Sorry, Pádraig, for putting you on the spot.
No, I was going to jump anyway. I think it's a very legitimate question. The IEM was there 10 years ago when the legislation was established. I hoped in my preamble that I gave an explanation as to why the original legislation was found to be deficient, and that's why the government decided to propose the amendments. In particular, the concept of having a single IEM, which we all recognise now, wasn't appropriate for both higher education and for English language education. But also, I think, in the quite very useful analogy that Mary Sheridan provided about trying to give assurance about a house being built when you can only look on the outside. We recognised, and the department recognised, and government recognised in the amended legislation, that simply looking at quality assurance procedures was never going to provide the guarantee of a high quality education that was protected, particularly when it's being offered by private providers, and the necessity to separate out that process of the due diligence assessment and to be able to put in place the learner protection fund so that learners can be able to be refunded in the case of a problem, and to be able to actually look at the academic and English language provision through the quality assurance procedures. So in terms of that, we've all learned from that, the primarily learning, meaning that we had to amend the legislation that was there. We also previously were not in a position to deliver on some of this because we simply weren't staffed up with the relevant expertise. We've been provided with the department, with the staffing, to do that, to roll out this initial phase with people who have the appropriate expertise. And I have full confidence in my team that we'll be able to deliver within these guidelines, taking a fair wind with the complicated format that Jim has provided. So it's great to see so many people here today and so many people who've stayed on. I hope it should be obvious that we have a cross-organisational team that have put this work in place, and that we are working hand in hand with the department in the rollout of the scheme, and we look forward to working with the providers to do this. As we've said all along, we have a consultative approach to doing things, and we all have, as Jim has said, a shared interest in providing a high quality education to international learners in Ireland. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Pádraig. I see another question in the chat. It's about the you mentioned that select schools will be consulted. Have these schools already been selected, and is there a cross section of providers? Well, the short answer to that is that the schools haven't been selected, and yes, we will be aiming to put together a sort of cross section of providers to look in some of the detailed areas, and we will have other all-in training and information events as we go on, where we'll be able to take more feedback. Again, Mary, I don't know whether you would like to comment on that one.
Just to say that we're going to be looking to engage with stakeholders from all over the country, from city from cities, schools based in cities, schools based in towns, year-round centres, summer centres, people who work with online, people who work with teacher training. So all different types of providers, a good cross-section, so that we'd be able to get relevant or useful feedback on the codes and the QA.
Thanks, Mary. There's another question I see in the chat, which is related to an earlier question around the Department of Justice. And the question asked is, will non-IEM certified providers be on the ILEP? Well, the answer to that is that once we've implemented the IEM, the plan is that the IEM certification, for want of a better term, will supersede the ILEP, and IEM certification will be required for student permissions and visas. So the answer is that there will ultimately be no ILEP once the scheme is fully implemented. So non-IEM certified providers will in the end not be on any sort of register relating to student permissions and visas. But we've some work to do to get to that point, and that's what we're beginning at this point. I think the questions are beginning to stop in terms of coming in. We had a couple more, just we might be able to wrap up with just around the application process. One of them relates to is information, accounts, legal status, etc., to be included on application or simply to be available in case of inspection. I think Mary answered that very adequately in our presentation. They will be submitted as part of the application and in the online format, and provider responsibility thereafter will be to maintain those up to date. Will the application process be something similar to ACELs, MEI, etc., that applications will be completed annually? Mary, I don't know whether you want to come in on that one.
Me, I can take it if you like. So from the due diligence point of view, we will be expecting our providers to have all of the information required at the outset maintained and up to date. So therefore, if at the outset of the process, you're asked to have 3 sets of financial statements, at the end of the first 12 months, you will replace the first set of accounts, the oldest set, with the newest set of financial statements. So you will be updating the due diligence requirements on your side throughout the year as changes occur. And those changes could relate to changes in ownership, changes in management, changes in structures. So that will be an ongoing piece on the due diligence side. Mary, do you want to pick up in terms of the code?
So the code of practice will have certain criteria for compliance, as we were saying earlier, and that will be uploaded as well on an online form. And we will be looking at the assessment of the code of practice and the QA compliance, and that will be then revisited every 3 years. But again, as Mary said, anything that's updated will be uploaded. For example, a change in academic manager or new programs that are offered will be uploaded as they happen to keep it updated.
Thanks, Mary. And another one I'm going to fire at you, if you don't mind. Will schools that already have ACELs accreditation go through the same process as schools that do not?
Everybody will undergo the same process, whether they are ACELs accredited or Equals accredited or any other inspection scheme. Everybody is starting this process from the beginning. So everybody will have the same process.
And can I chime in there? The difference here is that everybody's engaging for the first time in a new statutory process. So while what has happened in the past may make you better placed to engage with the process is a new statutory process. So everybody goes through the same gate with the same requirements.
If I can come in there as well, in the same circumstances, if a provider changes ownership currently, their validated programs don't transfer over. They'll have to go through the same process again with QQI. But obviously, it's a lot easier in the case of maintaining the same business level. So we're just applying similar criteria than we've had before.
There's a question then about the IEM being rolled out when all providers satisfy the necessary criteria or in stages, or as they are deemed compliant. In an ideal world, we would like the IEM to be rolled out at the same time for all providers, but realistically, that is unlikely to be possible. I mean, it'll depend on when providers themselves want to apply, when they feel ready to do it, and so forth. So what we want to do is to have the system open at various, and we're still working on the process on this at various points in the calendar, and that will allow providers to apply for it when they're ready to do so. And the progress through then the process will depend on how their own situation and being able to actually participate in the process fully. I don't know whether anyone would like to add to that. We're still at an early stage on looking at the sequencing of this, and it as you can imagine, it's quite a complex process, and we've done some initial work on that. And as I said earlier in my presentation, we will talk more about that as we have more to talk about.
I mean, we're trying to flag in advance, obviously, as much as we can in relation to this process, but a lot of it has to do with the provider readiness to work. We recognise that for businesses, that having the IEM would give certain people a first mover advantage. So for that purpose, we obviously would like to roll out the implementation at the same time as much as possible. But we also have to allow new providers to enter the system, so we can't stop the process while new providers are coming through. So as Jim says, it's a balancing exercise that we have to perform on this. There's one other question there, maybe I can take as well.
Yeah.
Why is the IEM only for visa required students? It might mean that EU students will not be provided with the same level of QA if the providers are not IEM accredited. The IEM is a voluntary exercise. No one has to recruit visa required students if they want. So the IEM will be open, as Mary said, for all English language providers. It's not just that, but what we have said is that the governmental policy will be that visa required students will be expected to enroll will only be allowed to enroll in organisations that have the IEM. So it's not true that it's only for visa required students. It will be open to all providers to apply for the IEM if they want.
Absolutely. Question: what if existing ILAP recognised courses do not meet the new code of practice criteria for courses? How will such a transition work? That's one that we have to work through. I mean, that'll be part of our policy and the process for authorization, which will come later in the year. But obviously, we'll have to take into consideration the whole area of transition. I don't know whether anyone else wants to make a comment on that at this point, but we will certainly be coming back to that issue because it is a key one. Okay. We have one. I'm going to take one final question. It's: will the IEM collaborate with Education in Ireland when it comes to supporting all IEM providers to recruit international students? The answer to that is yes, and we will be working closely with Enterprise Ireland, who look after the Education in Ireland brand, and indeed all relevant government departments and state bodies that have a sort of a role in promoting Ireland overseas. And the idea behind the IEM is that we will have that one brand that we can stand over and be able to benefit providers in the round once they've gone through this process. The key thing, though, is that we are able to stand over it, and that is an essential part of the process. The question of will providers be required to have a dedicated HR manager? That's really not a matter for us to decide, but there will be certain criteria to meet, and that will be a decision for providers to make. I don't know, Mary, whether you wanted to comment on that, or sorry, Mary Sheridan or Mary Brennan.
So in terms of HR functions, they have to be in place, but it wouldn't have to be a dedicated HR manager as long as the functions are being done correctly, as long as the systems are in place for recruitment. It doesn't have to be a specific person, but the HR functions would have to be, somebody would have to be responsible for them within the organisation, even if that person has 2 or 3 or 4 other hats in very small organisations, as tends to happen.
Thank you,
Jim, if I could just come in there, I mean, I think Mary Sheridan tried to portray it in her presentation as well. QQI does not have a policy of big is beautiful. We have been working with the private sector through our own work and the work of our antecedent bodies for a very long time, and have been dealing with very small providers who've been offering high quality programs of education and training for a long time, that have gone through the QQI re-engagement process, and new providers that have come through the QQI initial access process that we have. And many people have been able to demonstrate that size is not the most important criteria. They don't all have dedicated HR managers. They don't all have large structures. What they do have is to be able to make sure that their governance structures can be determined, and that the academic structures that they provide are separate from the governance and ownership structure. The re-engagement process that we've gone through with private providers, including those for higher education, has demonstrated that many of those providers have been able to engage with QQI through that process. And I fully expect that many of the English language education providers will be able to do so as well.
Thank you, Pádraig. I think that's a good upbeat note to bring our proceedings to a conclusion on. Just to say that we are capturing all the questions that have been submitted, and any that we haven't got to, we will actually address them in our FAQs. We also had a lot more pre-submitted, and we've already begun working on the answers for those. So just to say thank you to all the speakers, Pádraig, Tanya, the 2 Marys. I have to get out of the habit of saying things like that. And thank you very much for your attention. We can see by the series of questions that have been submitted before today and during today that there's great interest and engagement from the sector, and we are very much committed to helping you build helping you build your sector up over the upcoming period through this new process. So without further ado, I'd just like to wish you all well and a good evening, and goodbye.